Before we get started, we upload new story every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our daily uploads. The doorbell chimed at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew before checking the security monitor who it would be. After 12 years of silence, my son Ethan and his wife Chloe stood on my marble doorstep, their faces wearing those carefully practiced expressions of contrition that wealthy people perfect when they need something. They looked smaller somehow, standing there in their Silicon Valley casual wear, waiting for me to grant them an audience in the $15 million mansion they once thought I'd never be able to afford. 12 years ago, I was a different woman entirely. I had just lost my husband Robert to a sudden heart attack, and in my grief, I moved in with Ethan and Chloe in their sleek Palo Alto home, believing I could help raise my grandchildren while processing my own loss. I brought my life savings of $43,000 and immediately offered to help with their mortgage payments. I brought my hopes of being useful, of belonging somewhere during the most difficult period of my life. What I found instead was a household run like a tech startup, where efficiency trumped emotion and aesthetics mattered more than relationships. Everything was white, black, or that particular shade of gray that interior designers call sophisticated. I tried to fit into their world. I kept my belongings in my small bedroom, never leaving so much as a coffee cup in their pristine kitchen. I offered to cook family meals, but Chloe explained that they followed a very specific nutritional protocol designed by their life coach. I suggested we plant a small vegetable garden for the children, but Ethan informed me they preferred to source their produce from certified organic vendors. The children themselves seemed like small adults, speaking in measured tones and expressing preferences for things like mindfulness apps and sustainable fashion. 8-year-old Olivia would tell me she couldn't eat the cookies I baked because processed sugar disrupted her chakras. 6-year-old Leo explained that he preferred educational tablets to the wooden toys his grandfather had made because tactile play was less stimulating to his developing neural pathways. Meanwhile, I contributed what I could. My Social Security check went directly toward household expenses. I paid for the children's music lessons, their organic meal delivery service, and contributed to their college funds. I cleaned their house according to Chloe's detailed specifications, using only products that were both environmentally sustainable and allergen-free. But I was slowly disappearing in that house, becoming more like a live-in service provider than a family member. The breaking point came during their annual holiday gathering, which Chloe called a gratitude convergence instead of Christmas. I watched as Chloe introduced me to their guests as Ethan's mother who was staying with them temporarily while she figured out her next life phase, as if I were a wayward teenager rather than a woman who had raised her husband and was currently subsidizing their lifestyle. But the moment that broke something inside me happened near the end of the evening. Chloe was showing off their newly renovated master bathroom to guests, and one commented on how wonderful it must be to have such luxury. Chloe laughed, saying it was important to invest in spaces that supported their emotional and spiritual well-being, especially since they were dealing with the stress of supporting Ethan's mother through her difficult transition period. Supporting me, as if my monthly contributions and daily labor were somehow a burden they were graciously bearing, rather than the foundation keeping their lifestyle afloat. That night, something shifted in my chest. It wasn't anger exactly, though anger was certainly part of it. It was more like clarity, sharp and sudden as breaking glass. I realized that I had been so afraid of being alone that I had volunteered to be invisible. The next morning, I called my old friend Margaret, who had been trying to convince me to rent the garage apartment behind her house in Mountain View. I spent the following week quietly moving my belongings while they were at work and the children were at school. I left a note explaining that I had decided to pursue independent living, thanked them for their hospitality, and included my new address, along with a promise to continue contributing to the children's college funds. The freedom of that small garage apartment was intoxicating. I could leave a coffee cup in the sink overnight without apologizing to anyone. I could cook pot roast if I wanted pot roast. I could display photos of Robert on every surface without worrying about disrupting the feng shui. But freedom and income are two different things, and I quickly realized that Social Security alone wouldn't sustain me long-term in one of the most expensive areas in the country. After months of rejections, I finally found part-time work at a high-end garden center called Botanica Verde. I loved being surrounded by growing things again, something I had given up when I moved in with Ethan and Chloe. The customers were primarily wealthy homeowners who would purchase expensive plants and then return weeks later when their investments had died, frustrated and ready to spend more money rather than learning how to care for living things themselves. During my breaks, I started rescuing the plants that customers returned dead or dying. I discovered that most of these expensive casualties weren't actually dead at all. They had simply been stressed by sudden changes in environment or inappropriate care. With patience and proper attention, most could be brought back to full health. My small apartment began filling with recuperating plants, and the process of nurturing something back to health was deeply satisfying. After 6 months of successful plant rehabilitation, I suggested to the owner, Elena, that we offer a restoration service. Customers were thrilled to discover they could save their investments rather than constantly replacing them. Word spread that Botanica Verde could resurrect even the most hopeless cases, and soon we were receiving plants from all over the Bay Area. I started charging premium prices for my services, particularly for rare specimens. Within a year, my restoration service was generating more revenue than the regular plant sales. Elena offered to make me a full partner, and together we expanded to include rare plant acquisition and ongoing maintenance contracts for high-end properties. We rebranded as Verde Resurrection, and I found myself earning more money than I had ever made in my life, doing work that felt meaningful. The transformation wasn't just professional. Living independently, earning my own living, and being recognized for my expertise rather than tolerated for my existence changed something fundamental in how I moved through the world. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped asking permission for my preferences. I created a life full enough that Ethan and Chloe's absence, while sad, didn't feel like abandonment. The success of Verde Resurrection eventually caught the attention of Silicon Valley venture capitalists. I found myself in boardrooms explaining the market potential of plant rehabilitation to investors half my age. It was surreal, but I learned their language and secured funding that allowed me to expand into multiple locations with skilled horticulturists. By the time I turned 70, Verde Resurrection had become one of the premier plant restoration services on the West Coast. I had been featured in business magazines and invited to speak at conferences. More importantly, I had purchased my own home, a beautiful craftsman bungalow in Los Altos with a greenhouse studio. 3 months ago, I received an unexpected call from my lawyer about a magnificent estate going on the market in Palo Alto. The current owners were motivated to sell quickly due to financial difficulties. The business case for the purchase was compelling, and I made an offer that afternoon, full asking price in cash. I didn't ask who the previous owners were, though my realtor mentioned they were a young family who had gotten in over their heads during the recent tech bubble. The house felt like home in a way that Ethan and Chloe's place never had. I hosted dinner parties, offered tours to potential clients, and enjoyed having space to exist without constantly monitoring my impact on other people's experiences. The house had one feature I found particularly useful: a comprehensive security system that provided clear sightlines to several other properties in the area. Which brought us to this Tuesday afternoon, when the doorbell rang, and the cameras showed me Ethan and Chloe, finally ready to acknowledge my existence after 12 years of silence. I took my time answering the door. When I opened it, neither seemed to know how to begin. Ethan spoke first, saying they had been thinking about me lately, wondering how I was managing, hoping we might reconnect as a family. Chloe added that they had realized they might have made some mistakes in the past and were committed to healing old wounds. They both emphasized how much the children missed me. I listened without interrupting, noting how they presented their previous behavior as mutual misunderstandings rather than deliberate choices. When they finished, I invited them inside, curious to see how they would respond to the home I had built. They followed me through rooms that showcased not only my financial success, but my completely different approach to living. Plants filled every room as living companions rather than decorative objects. I offered them coffee and watched them take in the details, saw them beginning to calculate what this level of success might mean for their current situation. When I returned with coffee, the conversation shifted. Suddenly, they were asking about my business, expressing amazement at my success, wondering how I had managed to build such an impressive life. Ethan mentioned that he and Chloe had been exploring new investment opportunities and wondered if I might be interested in family partnerships. Chloe added that they had been rethinking their approach to extended family relationships and realized how much wisdom I could contribute to their household, especially now that the children were older. I let them talk, fascinated by their ability to reframe their obvious need as an opportunity they were generously offering me. Finally, when they had exhausted their prepared talking points, I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at both of them. I told them that I appreciated their visit and their apparent interest in rebuilding our relationship. But then I explained that the woman they remembered no longer existed. The woman who had been so desperate for family connection that she would accept invisibility in exchange for proximity, had disappeared somewhere along the journey from their guest room to this living room. I had built a life I loved, surrounded myself with people who valued my contributions, and created financial security through my own efforts. I told them I would be happy to have a relationship with them, but it would need to be a relationship among equals, rather than an arrangement where I provided resources in exchange for the privilege of being tolerated. I was no longer interested in optimizing anyone else's experience at the expense of my own, no longer willing to make myself small so others could feel large. The silence that followed was profound. Ethan tried a different approach, emphasizing how much the children had missed me and how unfair it would be to punish them for their parents' mistakes. It was emotional manipulation disguised as concern for the children, and we all knew it. I responded that I would love relationships with Olivia and Leo, but those relationships would need to be built on honesty rather than manipulation. I would not accept responsibility for an estrangement I had not created, and I would not allow myself to be used as a solution to parenting challenges they had brought upon themselves. Chloe's facade finally cracked. She asked if I intended to simply ignore 12 years of family history, if I planned to punish them forever for mistakes they were trying to correct. I explained that I wasn't maintaining grudges or seeking punishment. I was simply no longer available to participate in relationships that required me to minimize myself for other people's comfort. The conversation continued for another hour, with them alternating between appeals to family loyalty and barely veiled threats about limiting my access to the grandchildren. Through it all, I remained calm and clear. I was not isolated. I had built a rich community of meaningful relationships. I was not motivated by pride. I was motivated by self-respect and hard-earned wisdom. As the afternoon wore on, their desperation became more apparent. Ethan mentioned they were dealing with temporary financial challenges and could really use family support. I listened with genuine sympathy, but without any inclination to rescue them from problems they had created. When they finally prepared to leave, Ethan made one last attempt, saying that regardless of whatever had happened between us, I was still his mother, and family relationships were supposed to transcend petty disagreements. I walked them to the door and told Ethan that he was absolutely right about family relationships being important, which was precisely why I could no longer participate in arrangements that treated family members as disposable resources. I gave them my business card and suggested they make an appointment if they wanted to continue our conversation in a more formal setting. I made it clear that any future relationship would need to be based on mutual respect and genuine change, rather than strategic necessity and convenient amnesia. After they left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by my thriving plants, and thought about the 12 years that had passed since I last felt like I belonged in my own family. The transformation had not been easy, but sitting in my beautiful home, surrounded by evidence of what I had built when I stopped trying to fix other people's problems, I knew I had made the right choice. The next morning, I called my lawyer and asked him to draft a formal letter outlining my willingness to explore family reconciliation under specific conditions. I requested written acknowledgement of their previous behavior, concrete evidence of their commitment to change, and a structured plan for rebuilding trust over time. I never received a response to that letter. Apparently, accountability was a higher price than they were willing to pay for access to my success. But I was no longer the woman who would interpret their absence as evidence of my own unworthiness. I had learned that healthy relationships require mutual investment, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish everyone involved. Months later, I received a graduation announcement from Olivia, who wanted to share her acceptance to Stanford University. She included a handwritten note saying she had always wondered what happened to her grandmother and hoped they could meet for coffee sometime. There was no manipulation in her message, just genuine curiosity about the family member who had disappeared from her childhood without explanation. Over the following months, we built a relationship based on mutual interest and respect rather than obligation. Leo contacted me later, curious about his grandfather's woodworking tools. Building relationships with my grandchildren as young adults allowed us to connect as individuals rather than fulfilling prescribed family roles. My business continued to thrive, expanding into educational programs that taught plant restoration techniques to others. I discovered that the skills I had developed in my own transformation were valuable to other women who were rebuilding their lives after displacement or loss. The house in Palo Alto became a gathering place for people who appreciated beauty created through patience rather than purchased through consumption. Looking back on that Tuesday afternoon when Ethan and Chloe appeared on my doorstep, I realized their visit was a gift, though not the one they intended. Their desperation confirmed that I had made the right choice 12 years earlier when I chose uncertainty over diminishment, solitude over toxicity, independence over conditional acceptance. I had learned that authentic success was measured by the quality of daily life rather than the accumulation of impressive possessions, and that sometimes the most profound transformation begins with the simple decision to stop making yourself small for other people's comfort. If you like this kind of content, make sure to hit the subscribe button, drop a like and a comment, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on our new content.